Thank you, Julie. Hi, everyone. Happy Hanukkah. I'm thrilled to be with all of you and to dive into this week's Parsha. Julie also asked me to teach this week because of my expertise in dream work and specifically Jewish dream work. And this is the second Parsha we've had recently that had some interesting dreams. So we're also going to look at that briefly, and I'm thrilled to do that with you. So before we pop into the sources, I'm going to do a little activity that might be a teeny bit different than the way that you've used the Zoom chat before. So listen carefully to the instructions. I'm going to ask a question. You're going to type your answer into the chat, but then you're not going to hit enter. You're going to have a few seconds to actually think about it, type it out. And then I'm going to go 3, 2, 1, and then you're going to hit enter, and then it's going to come through. So instead of everyone, one person writes and then you read it and then you second guess yourself and then you're like, they're smarter than me, or you're like, I'm smarter than them, or whatever it is, we can kind of avoid that. Everyone gives their answer at the same time, and then I'll read some of them. All right, let's see if everyone got it. All right, so I'm going to ask a question, and you're going to type in the chat. And again, there's no wrong answer here. This is going to be a word association, and we're just kind of looking for patterns. So I'm actually going to say a number, and you're going to just type the first thing that comes through. Okay, ready? 3, 2, 1, 7. 7's the number. All right, we got Shabbat, we got week, 7 blessings, like in the wedding, the floor of my apartment. Someone just wrote Thursday. That's the first word that came to mind. See, I said no wrong. It's Shemitah, days of creation, week. All right, cool. All right, that was a little confusing the way I did it because it was a number and then I said 3, 2, 1. So I'm gonna give another number, and then I'm gonna go like this, and that's gonna mean it's time to enter. All right, everything in Tanakh, which is not 3. All right, so 7 is wholeness, perfection. It's the days of the week. It's Shabbat. Shabbat is the 7th day. Someone lives on the 7th floor. I live on the 8th floor, by the way. And all right, okay, beautiful. All right, so these are our associations with 7. All right, so the next number we're gonna give associations with is 8. Don't hit enter yet. Number is 8. You're going to type in the chat. Don't hit enter yet. Don't let anyone else influence your answer. What word free association? The first thing you think of. Doesn't have to be Bible or Parsha or Jewish related. All right. And hit enter in 3, 2, 1, go. All right. We have circumcision. Someone thinks of lunch because I said 8. Maybe I meant ATE. Why did 7, 8, 6, why was 6 afraid of 7? Because 7, 8, 9. You get it. All right. So we got some circumcision. Belonging to heaven, that great Beatles song, probably was about Hanukkah, right? All right, someone's favorite number. I live on the 8th floor. 8 is kind of like the infinity sign. All right, days of Hanukkah. All right, beautiful. Sukkot, that's a good connection. Pesach, right? We have these holidays that are a week, but they're 8 days. So that's interesting. Okay, 8 can be magical. Okay, great. So stop typing in about 8 because I'm going to make a little connection. By the way, I'm noticing a lot of people said Hanukkah, but I don't see anyone who actually wrote menorah, which I thought was kind of interesting. Same thing with 7. We have a 7-branch menorah. And we have menorah's 9 branches. All right, here we go. Hope I didn't influence you too much. Okay, the next number I'm going to give you is 9. Typing in the chat, not hitting enter yet. Typing in the chat, hitting enter in 3, 2, 1. 9 cat lives. Yes, 9 with pregnancy. Okay, someone has that many siblings. 3 times 3, right? 9 is like you can do a square root of it. That's a useful thing about 9. Total number of candles in the menorah, right? If we're including the shamash. On the last night anyway, that's how many. Cat lives, a stitch in time saves 9. All right, completion. So some people have some relationship with numerology. Okay, amazing. Thank you everyone for playing this game. We're going to be talking mostly about the number 7, but also the numbers 8 and 9, because they're very, very close to each other. And it's very common that something starts out as 7 and then becomes 8 or becomes 9, but it always somehow is in relation to 7. So in a lot of these examples, like 9 lives or 3 times 3, 9 is standing on its own. But in a lot of cases, we have 8 is really 7 plus 1, or 8 is actually it's like something bigger than 7, and it's its own thing, or 9 is this function that helps us do 8, which is actually related to 7. So thank you everyone for playing, and we're going to look at these numbers today so we can connect what's happening in this parsha to what's happening this year to what's happening this week. So Julie's going to put the link to our Safari page, but I'm also going to be sharing on my screen. And I'm going to start at the top because that's probably where we should start. All right. So in this week's Parsha, it opens with Pharaoh's dream. And if you are a fan of Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, you probably also enjoy this Parsha as well. And for some context, this is before Joseph has met Pharaoh. So we're hearing the story from Pharaoh's perspective, and Joseph, who is our protagonist, will come in soon. So what is the dream Pharaoh has? He dreamed he was standing by the Nile. Keep in mind here, the Nile is not just a location or a body of water. It is the body of water. It is the body of water that nourishes the entire region. And what's important to think about, some of you have heard me teach before about farming and agriculture and the role of agriculture in the Hebrew Bible. The Nile was also the source of water for the crops. So we might think, well, where does water come from? It comes from the sky. Or maybe if you're lucky, it comes from a well. In Egypt and in other parts of the world, the Nile, when it would rain, it would actually flood the tributaries. So even though sometimes they would rely on rain, what they're actually relying on is actually the Nile flooding. And in some versions of history, there's an idea that the Nile itself was a god, and the Nile was worshipped as a god. So think of the Nile not just as a location, but as a source for not just water, but also all of the minerals and all of the dead plant material and animal material that can then feed us, can bring that water and other nutrients to our crops. So Pharaoh has a dream. He's standing by the Nile. He's standing at the place of sustenance. And out of the Nile came 7 cows, handsome, sturdy, and grazed in the reed grass. So these magical cows. And it's important, the number of cows, very, very important. And we can imagine in those days, cows perhaps represented food for them, because it could, and here we go. Right after that, so the 7 cows came out of the Nile, walked around, and then ate. So those 3 things together. But then suddenly 7 other cows came out. They were close behind him, and they were ugly and gaunt, and they stood beside the other cows. And what happened? What did they eat? They didn't eat the grass. They ate the 7 handsome cows. So Pharaoh wakes up, and he has another dream. And some of us, this has happened to us. We have an intense dream. It shakes us. And then we're like, that was weird. And we fall back asleep. So this happens to Pharaoh too. He has a dream that is perhaps parallel, but not as significant, since we don't quite see all of the context. He sees 7 ears of grain. Sometimes this is translated as corn, but in the text it's actually shibalim. So we're going to translate that as grain. 7 ears of grain, 7 stalks of grain. They were very healthy, all growing on a single stalk. And close behind them, some other grain came and was scorched up. And the thin ears swallowed up the 7 solid and full ears. And then Pharaoh awoke. It was a dream. So I'm not quite sure how corn eats other corn or grain eats other grain, but there's obviously a parallelism between these two dreams. Pharaoh is very disturbed. This is a very cute graphic from freebibleimages.org of the fat cow, the skinny cows eating the fat cows, and the corn situation we just had. So what does Pharaoh do? And what should one do if you awake and you have a disturbing dream that you remember? You should go tell someone. So what did he do? He went around and he started asking all of his advisors, all of the magicians, all the smartest people he could find, and no one could interpret it. And somehow he got connected to this character, Joseph. There's a little bit of a backstory of how he found him. Joseph was actually in jail and doing some dream interpretation for some of the people there. And this really amazing thing happens. Pharaoh, and we can all imagine Pharaoh as this big egotistical person, says to Joseph, I have heard a dream, but no one can interpret it. No one I've talked to so far. Now I've heard that that for you to hear a dream is to tell its meaning. So for Joseph to hear a dream, he's going to be able to interpret it. And what's amazing is Joseph isn't like, oh yeah, I'm super smart. I'm going to tell you the answer. I have a great track record of telling people what I know and them being really happy about it. Nope. He immediately says that it is not him and that it's God who will interpret the dream. And this goes on through many, many passages. And I want to just say how significant this is, that in other sections, Joseph is seen as a know-it-all. And here Joseph is very careful to say, I'm going to help you, but it's not me, actually. It's God who's speaking through me. And Rashi picks up on this word, biladai, that Joseph uses, that he says, it's not me, it's going to be God. And it's God that will put the answer that will be for Pharaoh's welfare. And what we'll soon see is not just Pharaoh's welfare, but the welfare of all of Egypt and eventually all of Joseph's family. So Joseph interprets the dream. He, I'm not including every single line of the Parsha. You can go check it out later. But essentially that these two dreams are a prophecy that we're about to have 7 years of plenty. And then that's going to be our chance to gather it in. And then after that, there's going to be 7 years of famine. And because Pharaoh had this dream and because Joseph came and interpreted this dream, we're going to have plenty to feed us in the 7 years of famine. And Pharaoh is very grateful and also recognizes that it's not from Joseph, that it's from God, that this dream and that this prophecy and this ability to understand the dream is all from God. Our Midrash even picks up on this idea that it is an evil thing to take credit for something that actually comes from God. And it gives us, in Bereshit Rabbah, it gives this example of the 7 good cows, And actually, I'm going to skip it because I want to get to the Shemitah part. But this is a theme that comes back over and over again, that this idea of ego and what we really know. Before we go on to the next section, I want to ask folks a question. Joseph has had a dream that we now know, Pharaoh has had a dream that we now know is prophecy. Joseph also had a dream that turned out to be a prophecy. And I want to ask folks, and you can type in the chat. I want to ask folks how this sits with you. Are dreams prophecy? Should we be listening to our dreams as prophecy? I want to hear a couple of opinions on this. Whether we're talking about the story, we're talking about our dreams. I'll type it in the chat. Are dreams prophecy? Yeah, sometimes you have a dream that doesn't make any sense. You need a dream, you need a dream worker, you need someone to help you understand it. All right, so dreams have messages. It can be dangerous to try to interpret your own dreams. Okay, cool. So one of the ways, so we have multiple opinions here, which is great. One of the ways that in the dream school that I study in is that every dream that we have, it's giving us a message, and sometimes it's telling us to do something, and sometimes it's just giving us information, and it's not actually telling us to act. But the idea that we're bringing our, let's say, our conscious mind to our subconscious mind, that's what's happening here. And what's problematic is when people take our dreams too literally. And the idea here is that what we're reading is actually symbolic or metaphor for something else. And we have some other folks chiming in. Yeah, dreams are our unconscious mind. And absolutely, it depends what's happening in your life in the time. So I want us to take a minute and peek at this Zohar text, because what the Zohar actually is giving us a clue about dreams and the Torah, and what dreams and the Torah might have in common. It says, I'm skipping to the middle. All the words of the Torah are sublime and supernal secrets. And it starts talking about the idea that of the Torah, of the words of the Torah and the stories of the Torah as a garment. So it's talking about the angels. It says, of the lofty angels is written, he makes his angels as winds. This in the high place. When they come down to earth, the angels clothe themselves in the garments of this world. So if we run into an angel, they look like a regular human. Had they not clothed themselves in the garments after the fashion of the world, they would not have been able to exist in this world, and the world would not suffer them to exist. If this is so with regard to angels, then how much more so with regard to the Torah, which created them and all the worlds, and everything exists for its sake. When the Torah did come down to the world, were it not clothed in the garments of this world, the world would not have been able to suffer it. Therefore, the story of the Torah constitutes the garment. So the words, that even just us sitting at our computers, looking at black text on a white page, this is just the garment of the Torah. This is not the actual Torah, just like the angels. He who thinks that the garment is actually the Torah and not something else, let his spirit deflate and let him have no portion in the world to come. Meaning those who take the Torah too literally. I'm gonna jump to where it says 7. Just so the Torah has a body. The commandments of the Torah are called the body of the Torah. The body is clothed in a garment made up of the stories of the world. The fools of the world look on nothing but the garment, which is the story of the Torah, and nothing more. They do not look at what is under the garment. And we actually call this gufei Torah, which is this idea that it's the essence of the Torah. And what we want to do here is we want to take this passage in Zohar, and it's going to help us better understand the idea that dreams are also not meant to be taken literally, and those images are the garments of some sort of deeper message. So if something happened to you in a dream, we're not saying that happened, but we're saying that we should look underneath the garment to better understand it. And so too, we're going to do that with the Torah. And we're going to peek at this passage, a few passages from Berachot 55 through 57 in the Babylonian Talmud that give us some clues of what the rabbis thought we should think about dreams. It was a very, very long passage, but I couldn't help myself, and folks can read the longer version after the class. And what's amazing to me is that this passage that I brought, because I wanted to understand the passage about Pharaoh's dreams, actually talks about a good king, which is someone who we don't usually associate with Pharaoh, but perhaps this Pharaoh that saved people from the famine. And this passage also talks about famine. So let's see. It's very long, and I want to get to the point about the dreams. It talks about the importance of good dreams and bad dreams. Let's see. There's so many sections I want to do. Okay. And it also refers back to Joseph's earlier dream. All right. I'm gonna jump to actually 55b, where I actually have it in orange here. Rav Huna said, a good person is not shown a good dream, and a wicked person is not shown a bad dream. And so this is, of course, they have read this story that we've read today, and they're trying to make sense of it. A good person is not shown a good dream, and a wicked person is not shown a bad dream. Rather, a good person, this is the interpretation, the non-bold part, a good person is punished for his relatively few transgressions with bad dreams, and a wicked person is rewarded for his relatively few merits with good dreams. And this idea, King David never saw a good dream, and Achitophel never saw a bad dream. So it's saying that the good people had all these nightmares. They were perhaps dreaming on behalf of the people to give them information to save the people, and all these other examples. And the idea here is that it makes sense that someone who is a leader and perhaps an evil leader would have a good dream, or a good leader would have a disturbing dream, and that would give them information to support people. And there's this formulation that the Talmud gives that some people still do today. If you have a dream, you must tell it, and you must have an interpretation. There's this very famous passage in the Talmud. A dream not interpreted is like a letter not read. So you're receiving this message possibly from God, if you believe that, and you should tell it to 3 people, and they should say back to you, I saw a good dream. And they should say, Hatov v'hametiv, it is good, and it does good, and let's make it good. And they will recite these verses of transformation, and that will make it a good dream. So that's something you can do if you have a disturbing dream, even if you can't interpret it. There's some other passages here that give some context for the dreams, but I'm going to skip all the way to the end. But now you have the source, you can peek at it later. It starts giving this idea of 1/60th. You may have heard of it when it comes to kashrut, if some dairy accidentally falls into meat, or vice versa, but it's 1/60th of the total, then it's almost like it's nullified. And then you might say is the reverse of that. We have this whole list. Shabbat is 1/60th of the world to come. Sleep is 1/60th of death. A dream is 1/60th of prophecy. So to me, this says that the rabbis were open to the idea that dream could be prophecy, but they also don't want to say that all dreams are prophecy. And the important thing is that if you have a disturbing dream, is that you tell it to someone. And sometimes it's going to be prophecy and sometimes it's not. I wish I had a perfect answer for all of you on that question, but I love that even the rabbis don't totally agree with our with our group. All right. We're gonna connect our dreams here to Shemitah. And I know some of you have been following the fact that this year is considered the year of Shemitah, the 7th year in the agricultural cycle. This is a quick glossary because there's a lot of words that are used interchangeably. Shemitah or Shvi'it, the 7th year. And it comes from, Shemitah is a word that we only find in the Mishnah. We don't have it in the Tanakh. And originally comes from this word tishmetena in Exodus 23, saying that this is the year you should release and let the land lie fallow. This idea that in the 7th year, you should not farm, and that if you do that, there is an idea that you're giving a shabbat la'aretz, you're giving a Sabbath to the land. This originally comes from Exodus 23. And I just want to note here, this passage, even though the commandment is when you enter the land, meaning when you're no longer in Egypt, there's this rule that for 6 years you should work the land, and the 7th year you should rest. It's directly following one of the many times it says you were strangers in the land of Egypt. So in verse 9, you were strangers in the land of Egypt. 6 years you sow the land, 7th year let it rest. And there's, of course, lots and lots of ways that we parallel Shabbat of the week and Shabbat of years. So just like every 6 days, we have a 7th where we rest. Every 6 years, we should have a 7th we rest. And keep in mind, when we're talking about these ancient times, even if we're talking about 100 years ago, the majority of people have farmland and are either living on a farm, working on a farm, or hiring people to work on their farm for them. And the Torah gets even deeper into this in the book of Leviticus. It talks about this year of complete rest, that it's not just about the land, it's also for the animals, it's also for your laborers, and so on and so forth. Then we get to maybe Sarah's favorite passage in the entire Torah. And this is where we start thinking more carefully and linking back to our Parsha and 7 verses 8. Leviticus 25. You shall observe my laws, keep my rules, so you may live on my land in security. The land shall yield its fruit, and you shall eat your fill, and you shall live upon it in security. And so this is saying, because basically people are like, why do we need this Shemitah thing? And God's like, this is the system. It's a balanced system. You need a rest. The land needs a rest. Just trust me on this one. And this is amazing because basically God preemptively imagines, I know what you're going to say. I know what you're going to say. How does this even work? So God says, and should you ask, what are we to eat in the 7th year, if we may neither sow or gather in our crops? That's a really important question. How can this work? What are we going to eat? I'm afraid. And God says, I will ordain my blessing for you in the 6th year, so that it shall yield a crop sufficient for 3 years. So our crops that come in the 6th year will be enough to last not only year 7, where you're not farming, year 8, when you're just getting back to farming, and year 9, when you're starting, the 2nd year of the new cycle again. When you sow in the 8th year, you will be eating old grain of the crop. You will be eating the old until the 9th year, until the crops come in. And this is our passage of 7, 8, 9. As we, as the joke goes, why was 6 afraid of 7? 7, 8, 9, the name of our source sheet here. And I love this passage so much because I do think it is preposterous. You could try to imagine the first time someone ever was like, yeah, farm for 6 years, and then they just don't farm for a year. It's very difficult. I used to live and work on a farm. We thought about what it would look like for us to take a year off of farming, both in terms of our Jewish educational farming program, it's called Adama, also in terms of our farm business and our farm sales. And we couldn't figure out how to do it. It's not something you can just start doing. It takes a lot of planning and probably takes more than 6 years to plan how much storage you would need. But this idea that God is saying, trust me, there's going to be this blessing in the 6th year, I couldn't help but think about our Parsha and this idea of bounty followed by preventing famine through storage and redistribution. There's an amazing, amazing article. I just put a few paragraphs. It's many, many pages long by Dr. Jeremy Benstein, where he talks about the cycle of Shemitah and why this cycle is 7. And he actually references a few different places in the Torah where we have 7, but he focuses in on this week's Parsha, saying that talking about the role of Joseph and this idea of 7, and both in terms of agricultural fertility, but also in terms of the idea that this 7-year cycle can actually be the thing that brings us together and that can save us. And he really pushes us to think about consumerism and overconsumption, and the idea that whereas in the Bible, Joseph and Pharaoh used this 7-year cycle to indenture the people of Egypt. We're going to take all of your land and don't worry, we'll feed you, but you'll now be indentured. To say that thinking about this idea of the 7-year cycle and giving breaks actually is something we could do in modern times, to do the opposite, to redistribute wealth. Which again brings me to this question that about the menorah and the branches of the menorah. So we're not going to watch this whole thing, but I love that Bim Bam has this amazing 1-minute video of why do some menorahs have 7 branches, but a Hanukkah menorah has 8. And of course, Hanukkah menorah doesn't have 8 branches, it has 9, but because it has one for the Shamish. And what is up with the 7 versus 8 branches of the menorah? And we have this, I'm going to stop share for a minute. We have this idea that the menorah that we light on Hanukkah is somehow connected to the menorah in temple times, except that it's not. It's a different menorah. So the idea here is that in temple times, the menorah had 7 branches. And what do folks know? Why 7 branches in temple times? Why would the menorah have 7 branches? All right, 7 days of the week. So, but why would we have 7 days a week? Why would a menorah need 7 days of the week for a menorah? So it had to do with the temple, and it had to do with keeping the light, to mark the 7 days a week, and to, they didn't have paper calendars hanging on the wall, so they would know what day it is. So they would know which sacrifices to do, and so on and so forth. And there's a lot of iconography of the menorah. The most famous one being in the Arch of Titus, because people think, here I'm going to share my screen. People think that because this piece of art was made by a person who maybe saw the actual, pillaging of the temple and destroying the temple and stealing the sacred objects of the temple, that probably the original menorah looked a lot like this one. Though there's a lot of more theories. There's a great book, any Hebrew readers here, called Le'or HaMenorah, and it's an entire archaeological history of what we think the menorah looks like. So it's very strange, this going from 7 to 8. The 8 it's all symbolism. So our menorah is meant to be symbolic, whereas the menorah in the temple, and really everything in the temple, was meant to be practical, and everything in the post-temple times is symbolic. 8, if 7 is a week and 8 is a little bit extra. So I think there's a debate here if 7 is complete or if 8 is complete. I think in general, 7 is this Yes. So to be clear, isn't Hanukkah strictly referring to a Hanukkah menorah, whereas menorah is just a light that can be used anytime, regardless of the branches? Yes. So the word menorah just means lamp. And the word Hanukkah menorah refers to what we have, the 9 branches, including the shamash. And Chanukiah, is a modern Hebrew word that was created in order to differentiate these two things. And Hanukkah menorah and Chanukiah are the exact same thing. But the rabbis of the Talmud did not use the word Chanukiah. That is a modern word, and can be helpful for some folks. So Hanukkah is the Sukkot that was missed last year, right? So I think there's a lot of different theories of why 8 and why not 7. And it's not like the Hanukkah is completely disconnected from the ancient temple. The Hanukkah story, the whole point of lighting the oil for 8 days, has to do with the 8 days that it took to get more oil for the daily light. And so I want us to go back to Pharaoh's dream. And we could go back to Joseph's dream. There's interesting numerology there in terms of Joseph and his brothers and 11. But it's very significant, I think, that we're talking about 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine. And since we're talking about a dream and not necessarily a historical event, it's almost, think of it more like a folk tale where each thing represents something else. When we had, Mother Goose, or we had Hansel and Gretel, those weren't real people. We tell that story to teach a lesson and to have it reflected back in ourselves and better understand ourselves. So if we think of this story of Pharaoh, who is this great king who had this disturbing dream, so disturbing he had to go tell everyone about it. And the dream said, you're going to have 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine. You better do something about it. And Pharaoh said to himself, what should I do? I like trying to imagine that, again, there's no ein mukdam u'meuchar b'Torah. There's no before and after in the Torah. It's just one big Torah. This is what Rashi says, quoting the Talmud. I like to imagine that Pharaoh was also getting a message about Shemitah, and that I'd like to imagine there's like another version of the story where Pharaoh collects the food in the first 6 years. And just like that Leviticus passage in Leviticus 25 that we read, that Pharaoh sees that in the 6th year, there's this bumper crop, especially, and there's enough food to last 3 years. And that after that 7th year of actually not working the land, that it actually prevents the famine. So there's a couple different ways prophecy works in the Bible and in other places. Really what prophecy does is the prophet comes and says, this thing is going to happen if you don't change your ways. And we have this example with Jonah where, Jonah's really mad that he warns people, change your ways or you're all going to die. And they change your ways and things are better. And he's like upset because he wanted to see his prophecy come true. But actually his role as a prophet is to prevent the destruction. I want to see another version of the story where Pharaoh actually prevents the famine by keeping Shemitah. And I know a lot of people disagree with me. Shemitah only has to do with the land of Israel. But to me, the idea of Shemitah is about balance and is about faith, and not just faith in the earth or faith in Hashem, but faith in the community and supporting each other. And the idea that we would make enough crops or make enough oil or make enough sufganiyot and chocolate gelt, that there's enough for everyone, and really plan that in advance and imagine a time not just of doing the minimum necessary, but the idea of wholeness, and not just 8 meaning 7 plus 1, or even 9 being 8 plus 1, but the idea of wholeness, that the week of Hanukkah can be this bonus of plenty, that both takes us back to Joseph's honoring Pharaoh and honoring God by saying, look, I'm going to help you, but it's not me. I'm not smart just naturally. I'm a prophet. I'm getting this information from God, and I'm going to pass that on to you. And for me, as a mindfulness practitioner, which is something I teach often at Roman Yeshiva, interconnected with my role as a Hebrew priestess and a dream worker, when I look at this parsha, I see it as also opportunity for us to reflect on our own egos and what is really ours. And if we can see the beauty of our Chanukiah, of our fried foods we're having this week, of our beautiful faces that we're seeing each other on Zoom, not as something that I made, but something that is existing because of all of us together and because of our faith in God, then I think that will give us a lot of joy in this season and in the year to come. So happy Hanukkah, Shabbat Shalom, and I hope you'll check out, I also have an essay at the bottom that you can read that's just about the ego and the parsha and dreams. And thank you, Julie. Thank you, My Jewish Learning, for everyone.